moment.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm looking forward to hosting this conversation over the next hour with the founders of the Half My DAF movement, David and Jen Risher. David is a former Microsoft and Amazon executive who co-founded World Reader. That's a nonprofit with a goal of getting 1 billion people reading through digital books. He's helped get digital books to over 15 million children in the developing world. And now with COVID and the crisis here in America, he's working to get his resources at World Reader to get the digital reading program to more kids in our country. Jen's the author of We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. It tells the story about getting lucky, and it explores the hidden impact of wealth on identity, relationships, and a sense of place in our world. She believes that staying silent around topics like philanthropy creates problems for both those with money and those who need the money. So we're going to address in a big way in this hour how to get money out of DAFs and into the hands of the charities that need them. We're also pleased today to have 2 guests who are going to share how DAF giving has impacted their organizations. It's Regina Watson, Senior VP of Gift Planning from St. Jude's Children's Hospitals with us, and Rob Williams, who's the co-founder and chief scientist of Oceans Initiative. We will have a question and answer session at the end. So when you have a question, please post it into the chat room. Nick Ellinger is there. He'll be organizing all our questions, and then we'll queue them up to our speakers at the end. And also at the end, there will be 2 slides. There's a survey with a question that I need your help with. I've set aside some money for DAF grant making. This amount of money represents more than half of the balance. So I will, with all my grants, I will qualify for the Half My DAF challenge. So we're looking for your help in figuring out how many grants I should make to send out that $20,000. So while you're listening to everybody's input today, please consider how you would split up the money and make grants. So with that, David and Jen, please begin and tell us what motivated you to create Half My DAF.
Right. Well, thanks, Jack, and thanks everyone for being here. Thanks, Regina and Rob, for joining us as well. So we're going to walk through kind of what is a donor advised fund and how can I get access to the money that's sitting in those funds. And our goal is really to inspire giving. And so we're going to help you inspire giving as well and talk to you about how you can get access to more money through Half My DAF with opportunities to get matching grants from us.
That sounds good. All right, I'm going to be running the slides here. So we're going to sort of take it back to sort of DAF 101 just for a second to make sure that everyone's kind of at the same level. What is a donor advised fund? Well, you can think about it like a charitable checking account. Some people think about it almost as sort of a mini foundation, but let's just sort of stick with a charitable checking account concept where you put a certain amount of money in. Maybe you've had a liquidity event as a donor, maybe you've gotten very lucky and your company has gone public, or maybe it's something much more minor, or maybe someone in your family has passed away. And so you have some money that you want to use charitably, but you don't know where you want that money to go just yet. It's an irrevocable charitable contribution. DAFs actually are mini charities in and of themselves. You literally are giving money to a charity called a donor advised fund. And then you as the donor get to make grants out of that. So if you have $20,000 to pick a sort of number, it's sort of at random, but that would be kind of a nice size on the smaller size, but nice size kind of a DAF. You put $20,000 in all at once, you get a $20,000 tax deduction. And then over the course of that DAF's lifetime, which can be actually as long as you want it to be, you can make grants out of that donor advised fund to other charities so that they get them. Importantly, that money does grow while it's in that donor advised fund. You can invest it in mutual funds and various other, you can even do impact investing if you want to. So you've got some flexibility about what you do with the money while it's kind of waiting to be deployed. The one thing you can't do is you can never take it back. So it really is an irrevocable contribution. they pay out a requirement too. Now that, depending on your point of view, is either sort of a blessing or a curse. Some people really like the fact that it can be sitting around there forever. But as Jen will tell you, our point of view is there's just too much money kind of trapped in DAFs right now, not really going anywhere. In fact, there's over $140 billion that's been kind of parked in DAFs, not really going anywhere. So as Jen said, our goal is really to figure out a way to motivate that money and move it through the system and remind everyone that behind every single DAF is a person, is a donor, just like any other donor, and they want to be treated like that.
Yeah, so there are three types of DAFs that you can think about. So there's the big guys. These are the national DAFs of Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard. So when you get a check in the mail and it comes from Fidelity, it's likely coming from a DAF. There are also community foundations that are more focused locally on giving in local communities. And these are like the Napa Valley Community Foundation, Chicago Community Foundation. There are many community foundations throughout the country. And then there are single purpose DAFs, and these are often focused on religion or focused on education. Even Stanford University has its own DAF. And over the last few years, DAFs have just grown in numbers. There's over 870,000 DAF accounts across the country, and they've gotten smaller. People can open a DAF with $1,000. So we saw that last year that there are a lot of smaller DAFs, but those are the types of DAFs you can think about when you're thinking about DAFs.
And we'll circle back to this, but as Jen said, an important indicator that a person has a donor advised fund is you get a check from a Schwab or Fidelity. Those community foundations, we're going to circle back to those as well. Okay. So why do people put money in DAFs in the first place? Again, this is going to be very basic for some people, but other people might find this surprising. Often it's for something that has nothing to do with charity. It's because you had some liquidity event, some taxable thing that happened in your life. Frankly, you probably got some chunk of money, either unexpectedly or sort of all at once. And so in many cases, your financial advisor said, hey, we can set up this donor advised fund. And what that will do is it will give you an immediate sort of tax offset, let's say, to whatever gain you've had, but it doesn't force you to make a decision about where you want to give that money. And for a lot of people, particularly, let's just sort of, pardon me, think of someone maybe in her 20s or 30s who's just had this sort of extraordinary event of a company going public, or maybe a much smaller thing, but whatever. Charitable giving may not be on her mind. So the idea that I can kind of put my money away and know that it's going to be used charitably at some point is very attractive. It also allows for certain technical things. So for example, you might have unappreciated stock. Again, a company that has just gone public might have a very low basis. This is sort of stock option terminology, but in any case, and you can put that right in the donor advised fund without paying capital gains tax on it. So from a financial planning perspective, it makes a lot of sense for people, particularly for people who are thinking charitably long-term, but don't necessarily know in the short term what organizations they want to give to, or in many cases, even what sectors they care about. And then the last thing is, and again, this would be for sort of a very large event. They're much, much easier to set up than a foundation or some other charitable vehicle. They're actually really almost trivial. It's almost like setting up a checking account at your bank. And in 48 hours, you have this vehicle that, as you say, gives you this, or as I say, gives you this charitable donation and allows you to sort of organize your charitable giving in a bunch of ways. But as Jen says, over time, over the last, 10 to 15 years, DAFs have become incredibly popular. A bunch of different reasons. Frankly, one of the reasons is if you're one of the big charitable one of the big sponsors, like a Fidelity or a Schwab or a Vanguard, they actually turn out to be very profitable. So I mean, let's remember that we're, these are nonprofit vehicles, but we're living in a capitalist system, right? So these are companies like Fidelity who are saying, gosh, people are giving us money and they're just kind of letting it hang out there, which allows us to do various different things with it sort of under the surface, and even allows us to charge a small fee. So DAFs, they make a lot of money for the DAF sponsors, and they're very convenient for donors. They are kind of like having a checking account that allows you to organize your giving. So $140 billion in total sitting in DAFs, and you can see the growth rate over the last couple of years.
Yeah, $140 billion is sitting there. So that's super frustrating. But why aren't individual donors giving from DAFs? I mean, it's easy to put the money in. There's no urgency in moving it out. So, that they get you get your tax break, but then why aren't you moving it through? When we started Half My DAF, we heard from people saying, oh, I kind of forgot that I had a DAF. So this tax event has happened, the money's gone into a DAF, and then life happens. And then life does happen. So you're busy, you're working, you don't have time to think about, where you might want to give your money. And I think this is a very common situation for people, is they think, well, I want to get to it. I'll get to my charitable giving, when I'm older or later, when I have time to really think about it. And it's a little overwhelming, because unless you have some passions or interests, or you have a charity that you always give to, it can be unsettling to think, where am I going to give? I have to have a philanthropic strategy. I have to do my research. I have to make sure every dollar is going to, and people can get overwhelmed, and people, are fearful of getting it wrong. And so I think it keeps many people stuck. Another reason that we found that people don't give from DAFs is that they look at that money, even though it's not theirs, but it's kind of theirs. I mean, they get to play with it. They get to choose when and where it goes. So they sort of start to view it as an asset. And it's very human. And so it's kind of giving those donors a little nudge and saying, hey, let's move that money through, especially now.
If you're a nonprofit, think about each one of these sort of almost reasons below the reason of why a person might not be moving. A lot of the times it really is sort of innocent enough, but anyway, the impact has been pretty enormous. So how do you start to identify who your DAF donors are, so you can start to have these conversations? And again, we'll come back to those conversations in a second. Well, first, just look at who the checks are coming from. And if you haven't organized your database in this way in your nonprofit, do so. In other words, put a check mark, put a field in your database that says this money looks like it came from a DAF. Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, Mellon also has one, some of the national guys. But also pay attention to community foundations, the Chicago Community Foundation, the Brooklyn Community Foundation, whatever it might be. And we see special focus here because the community foundations, they're DAF holders. So in a sense, they're, let's say, as complicit in this as everybody else. But they, unlike the big guys that really are quite profit oriented, and that's kind of their focus, community foundations do have a charter that says we want to support our local communities. And so particularly if you're a nonprofit doing work in a local community, it's a big flag when you get money from a community foundation that whoever is behind that check, and remember, behind every one of those checks is typically a person or a family, that person is sort of signaling, gosh, I want to invest in my local community. So super, super important there. Any donation over about $10,000, there's nothing magic about this number, but it sure should, aside from tagging that person as potentially a major gift person, that should begin maybe a conversation about, do you have a donor advised fund?
I even want to say, we should change that slide, because what we learned last year is that people are giving from DAFs and they are smaller. So if you get a $1,000 check, a $5,000 check, this could also be coming from a donor advised fund, and take a look at those. For
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, some people give multiple ways. In fact, many people do, they'll do some on their credit card, they'll do some out of their DAF. And so even something that doesn't look like a DAF, but is a bit bigger than you're expecting, it could be the beginning of a conversation. Board members and ex-board members. I mean, here, of course, we're being a little stereotypical. Not every board member is a wealthy board member, but it's a conversation you can have with your board, because remember, again, this is money that's been put aside for charitable uses. And in many cases, people just aren't super focused on it. So it's a good conversation starter. And then asking people, and you'll see some examples later in the presentation about the type of promotion that you can do.
Take that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, okay. So once you've identified people, then, what do you do? And, in a sense, you treat them like any other potentially high capacity long-term donor. But again, the signal here is they may not have given very much so far, but they're letting you know that they've got capacity. Recent DAFs, as Jen said, can be quite small, but really up until a couple of years ago, the minimum to open a DAF was $5,000 or $10,000. And if you look in total, and this is just raw averages, the average DAF is $150,000. Now that's an averaging very big DAFs and very small DAFs. But again, it's a very indication. So now here you go back to just donor stewardship 101, showing the impact their gift will have now. where that now is really quite important. Remember, the DAF mindset a little bit is I'm saving this for later. And so you've got to kind of counter that with, this problem is not necessarily getting smaller. We're having struggles right now, and so forth. So that now point is that adding that urgency is so important. Sharing stories of others who are giving, of course. I mean, I run a nonprofit, so I spend my life telling people about the impact that reading has and the impact that, how that unlocks people's opportunity. You know this just as well as we do. And then addressing those multi-year gift issues. And this is a little bit of a technical thing. So nonprofits, as many people on this call will know, multi-year gifts are wonderful, right? They provide visibility into the future. And so DAFs, because of their legal structure, make it somewhat difficult to do multi-year gifts from, because you sort of theoretically can't use a DAF to satisfy a multi-year pledge. The reason I say theoretically is that even the most conservative DAFs like Fidelity, you can look on their website, they have all sorts of language about how you can have an informal conversation about a multi-year gift. Or in fact, you can have a multi-year gift that's a very formal conversation and literally plug that into the DAF. So just like a bill pay service where, on let's say March 15th for the next 3 years, that DAF will pay out $10,000. And that's completely above board as long as you sort of put that in all at once. So you can ask questions about this later if that's confusing, but for sure that's
and donors. I mean, donors can, and I've done this myself, like told organizations, I want to commit to 3 years of, this amount every 3 years, every year. Mm-hmm. And that's just my commitment as one person to an organization. I don't involve Fidelity in that. And I just, plan on giving that amount. So it's sort of, it's not technically a 3-year gift, but I'm making that kind of commitment.
For sure. That kind of handshake commitment.
Yes.
For sure. The other thing, and as Jack mentioned, I for many years was at Amazon, so I spent a lot of time thinking about how to make things easy for people. Man, if you make things easy for people, they will do more of it. And so there is a little widget. You can Google this. It's called Daf Direct. It's actually sponsored. It was kind of created by Fidelity, but it works on any of the big national sponsors DAFs. And all that allows you to do is on your website, you can put sort of the equivalent of kind of a one-click donate button, but it can donate right from your DAF. It's keyed to your nonprofit because you put in your identification number. And so it just removes some of the friction from DAFs.
And I think this is so key because, again, it makes it easier for me when I get a newsletter or a request and there's an opportunity for me to just give from my DAF. I'm likely to give more. Mm-hmm. It makes it easy. I don't have to think about it. When I have to, get out a check or use my credit card, I'll give less. I mean, I really will. And plus then you're having to pay a fee. So it really is a win-win to make it easy for me to give more, to have that little button on every communication.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, Google Daf Direct, you'll see examples of other people. It's not necessarily a beautiful widget. I will tell you that right now, but it's functional. It does what it needs to do. And then again, if you run a nonprofit or you advise nonprofits, remember behind this DAF mechanics, is basically just a big machine that spits out checks, or at least that's what it did in the past. But increasingly, organizations like Fidelity and Schwab are activating their electronic funds transfer mechanism to allow nonprofits to receive funds electronically. And particularly now during COVID, there are a lot of checks sitting in mailboxes that no one are opening right now. So again, go to, the Fidelity website, for example, and you sign up. It takes about 2 minutes to fill out a PDF form or an online form. And then that's that. And then creating a sense of urgency with incentives. Again, this is not news, and this is going to lead us to half my DAF. But the idea that a matching gift is out there is pretty powerful, which kind of leads us to the next part.
Yeah. So last year, when COVID hit, Dave and I were sitting in our backyard and really our hearts were going out to nonprofits. David was feeling it personally because suddenly he felt like the funding was drying up. And as you know, I mean, there's more need than ever. And yet the stock market is crashing and you can't hold your luncheon and you can't hold your gala and you can't kind of do your usual fundraising. And I was doubling down on places that I already gave and accelerating those 3-year gifts, but we wanted to do more to really help nonprofits because they weren't going to be around if we didn't kind of really give. And we were highly aware of the money that was sitting in donor advised funds. And we thought, let's connect the two. Let's inspire more money to move out of donor advised funds to nonprofits now. So we put up $1 million and we said, anyone who commits to halving their DAF, spending down half the money in their DAF by September 30th last year, will be eligible for matches from us. So we asked donors to make that commitment and start giving. And we said, you can give wherever you want to give. We won't support violence or hate speech or gun ownership, but anything else we'll support. Our goal really is to inspire giving. And it was really exciting. We started May 5th and we offered grants in the middle of July and then more grants at the end of September. And our $1 million ended up moving $8.6 million out of donor advised funds into nonprofits, which was a huge win and very exciting.
It was one of those things that exceeded expectations, for sure. And so much so that people, by the end of it, were saying, well, okay, what are you guys going to do for an encore? How are you going to make this into sort of into a thing? And at the beginning, we didn't have a plan, but as the year drew to a close last year, we said, you know what, let's do this again. And let's see if we can actually do it bigger. Our goal remains exactly the same. We still want to inspire donor advised fund donors to give now and to move some of that 140 billion. By the way, last year was 120 billion. So we're sort of failing here. We're kind of moving in the wrong direction, right? But anyway, to move those billions of dollars through their donor advised fund and out into the world where it can be put to work by the people who are actually doing the work. That's what's so sort of crazy making. So anyway, this year we sort of put the word out. And in fact, everybody who came in last year as kind of one of our co-fund sponsors, we ended up having a couple of families come in and help us take our original $1 million, make it 1.4 million. They came back, they said, we want to do it again. It was very satisfying for them. So that was super exciting. Our own daughters came in on it as well, which is also very exciting. We have a 21 to 23-year-old daughter. And so, bottom line, we now have $3.1 million to put to work, not just $1 million. So roughly 3 times the amount. Going in, which means theoretically, at least, that we might have 3 times the amount going out. So, 3 times 8 is $24 million. So we're hoping to get $20 million plus moved out into the nonprofit space. That's our goal, to inspire people and to move that amount of money. You see that we added some special issue areas here. The reason for that is some of our donor partners said, I've got real interest in racial justice, or I've got real interest in the environment. And we said, that's fine. So the way it works, to be super clear, is any nonprofit, any donor can say, I want my donation to be eligible for a match. And we do this kind of random match process because we don't have enough to give to everybody, but we try to do as many as we can. If everyone goes in the general pool, and then if you're an organization focused on education and underserved communities, racial justice, environment, climate, or reproductive health, you'll effectively get sort of a second chance at a match. So you'll have a higher chance of getting money. And I know this can be a little confusing the first time you hear it. Feel free to ask us questions at the end. But bottom line, everyone's eligible automatically. And then if you're in one of these categories, you've got higher chances. We'll do matches twice over the year, in the middle of May and at the end of September. At the end of September, this is done. So there's some of your urgency. The conversation is if you don't act before now or before September 30th, you don't get the money. And our goal is also to help nonprofits like the ones on this call to get smarter about how to do all this. This is just a screenshot from last year, and it gives you a sense of some of the organizations that got grants. You see the first column there, or the first money column there, is the grant that came into us, and then the second column, this was done actually fairly early in the year last year, were the grants. I think this was after our first match. So your organization can be here.
So let me turn it over to Rob and Regina. Rob, why don't you start and share some of your experiences with donor advised funds, and you had an experience with Half My DAF.
Thanks very much. So we keep this slide up. Am I going to be looking at my face for the next 5 minutes?
Yes.
Well, I can't thank you enough, first of all, for the invitation and the introduction. My name is Rob Williams. I'm a Canadian marine conservation scientist. My wife is from Seattle, and so we moved here a few years ago when our daughter was born. but we run nonprofits in both countries. Our organization is called Oceans Initiative, and we're a team of scientists on a mission to protect marine wildlife. And we do that in a number of ways. We're probably best known for our work on the critically endangered population of killer whales in the Pacific Northwest. We're trying to keep their habitat clean and quiet and full of fish. But we work internationally in a training while doing approach to try to help colleagues in Indonesia and Chile and Peru and other countries. We teach people how to do marine biodiversity conservation work and then take them on the boat. And so that we're training people while we're collecting data. And then my wife runs a program, Erin Ash runs a program mentoring women in marine science and trying to break down barriers. And I think we have an unusual perspective on this donor advised fund issue because we are, well, we're co-founders. We're both, we both did our PhDs in conservation biology. We're both fully invested in the mission. And when you co-found a nonprofit, of course, you get to see the growth from zero to now, one grant at a time, one contract at a time, one major gift at a time. And so I think as a chief scientist in a larger organization, I might not have been able to track those $20 donations and 50 and 100 and 1,000 and 10,000. So I think when I got this invitation, and thank you again for the opportunity to talk about what we've learned over the last few years, I felt like an imposter because I am a scientist, not a fundraiser. But I'll tell you what I learned. 3-4 years ago, I didn't know what a donor advised fund was until I started getting these checks, just as you described them, from Seattle Foundation or from Fidelity or Schwab. And of course, my sisters and I are the first generation in our family to go to university. And so we just didn't come from a background where we knew much about investing or donor advised funds. So I started asking the donors very awkwardly. And then one just said, do you know how many nonprofits have the name ocean in their title? If you just put this little widget on your website, it would be so much easier for me than having to call and direct the money and hope it gets there. And so we spent a little bit of time, took less than an hour to add the WordPress widget. And all of a sudden I started seeing $500 donations from people whose names I didn't recognize. And it was wonderful. We have, I mean, first of all, I should say we have a policy of not taking on unpaid interns because in our field that just perpetuates the problems we have with diversity and equity and inclusion in conservation biology and in ocean conservation in particular, where people often pay to get their first gig, their first experience. They pay to volunteer. So we have a policy of not taking on unpaid interns, but we do allow people who have a very separate career, professionals, to volunteer periodically. And we had the great good fortune of having someone from the University of Washington, Karen Sinclair, who's our development director, volunteered to take on Oceans Initiative as her case study at University of Washington's nonprofit fundraising program. And she helped us kind of track down to make sure that everyone who had sent a check, of course, we knew how to say please and thank you, but we didn't know how to thank people who were sending checks through Fidelity or Seattle Foundation. So she helped us do that. And I think in these few minutes, I'll maybe talk about sort of these small, medium, and large examples over the last 3 years. The small ones are these, $500,000, $2,000 checks that would appear out of nowhere. And I thought of donor advised funds as sort of wonderful surprises that could catalyze new program areas, things that were close to our heart, but maybe didn't have a line item in our budget. So my wife's program on mentoring women in marine science, it's just something she does. Our work, when we had been doing capacity building surveys in Indonesia, we learned that Bali has a day of silence where everyone stays home and they're quiet for 24 hours. And we had a hunch that would drop ocean noise levels. And so we went back and partnered with local scientists and dropped hydrophones around Bali and found that, sure enough, the ocean noise levels did drop when people stayed home and the airport shut down and the shipping ports shut down. Things like that never would have been funded without a little bit of seed funding, a little bit of catalytic funding from these just sort of unexpected gifts. And so donor advised funds historically have made up about 2% of our annual budget. welcome, but certainly not going to keep the lights on in and of themselves. That was my perspective. That was my perception. Then sort of as we got sort of medium-sized, there was one donor, just as you said. I mean, it's uncanny. We had one donor who was writing $10,000 checks. And these were from her personal account. We didn't know that she had a donor advised fund. COVID hit, and all of a sudden we had to make some really tough decisions. We're a marine conservation group, so obviously we need a boat. We need to have a team of people on the water studying whales and dolphins and salmon and seals. There's a very seasonal component to our mission. When the whales come back, that's when we go out into the field and collect our data. And then over the winter, we do our fundraising and data analysis and reporting. When COVID hit, we didn't really know what to do, of course. And so my wife and I, who have a 6-year-old daughter whose co-op preschool shut down, we decided we would launch this virtual marine biology camp. That was kind of a goofy idea that we just felt powerless as parents, but we thought we could do it. And so it was this wonderful tradition where my daughter and I would bake something twice a week. And for 11s, we'd hold this kind of Facebook, Instagram live thing. And 30,000 kids learned about our organization, about whales and sharks. And we invited experts. We invited a local, struggling artist to teach a watercolor painting class to teach kids how to paint killer whales and dolphins. And we just had fun, and we ate our snacks and we talked, and kids sent in questions and painted us pictures of their favorite dolphin. And it was wonderful. At the time, of course, we were panicking, because how do you run a nonprofit when, as our donors were saying, we're freaked out. We don't know if we have money or we don't. One donor said it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where giving to the ocean and to conservation is going to be down my list, but don't worry, it's never going to be off my list altogether. But it was these medium-sized gifts from donor advised funds that allowed us to kind of keep doing things like that, where there was no money coming in. They were fantastic. And then, like a miracle, we got this match from Half My Daf, which I had been tweeting about and profiling, featuring on Instagram and our MailChimp to our donors. Never really expected that we would get this match. But what was wonderful about it is that it kept the boat working, because although we were creative, our team was wonderful. They just said, we'll form socially distanced, isolated, quarantined households to keep the field work going, 2 or 3 people at a time. We earn a living when the boat is on the water, and that's a fixed cost that we couldn't replace. So the $10,000 match that we received last year had a major impact, because particularly in those early months, we just had this very big drop in our revenue, and we just didn't know how to replace it. So it was wonderful, kept the boat going while we kept the people going and tried to put on a brave face in public, and it worked. And that led us to have some pretty fun conversations with our donors and to say, hey, there is this program. Do you have a donor advised fund? Or if you know anyone who has a donor advised fund, please pass on this thing. And of course, we did our year-end fundraising appeal in November, December. We had a pretty ambitious target for our year-end donor appeal. We learned, COVID taught us that we just couldn't keep doing this mission the way we were doing it, with Aaron and me as senior scientists also being the executive director doing the admin in Aaron's case, and me doing the fundraising. We needed mission support in sort of that mid-career level between the early career researchers who keep the organization running and the senior scientists who are sometimes the bottleneck. And we needed development support. We needed Karen on staff. We just couldn't keep relying on her as a volunteer. So when we sent out this appeal, we were a little disappointed, to be honest, that one of the donors who had given us $10,000 a year for 2 years did not respond. Other people did. We were very lucky. We were very grateful. But then this donor surprised us with one of those emails that you dream about. In January, she emailed us and said, okay, I've given this a lot of thought. I am not going to, didn't give in December when there was this apparent sense of urgency, but she said, effectively, you're asking me to choose between your mission and your organization's core capacity and development. And I don't think you should have to choose. So I will give you $75,000 from my Schwab charitable account, my donor advised fund, if you can match it. You've got a month and a half. You've got till the end of February. Now, we had just asked all of our donors to give in December, so it was tough. But by focusing on the people who had donor advised funds, they had effectively already given the money away. So it was easier to ask them in January or February than it would have been otherwise to ask to give out of their checking account. And I'm thrilled that with the support of the vast majority of whom gave from their donor advised funds, we did raise the $75,000 match. In fact, we exceeded it by $2,664, which means that we get to hire our first quantitative ecologist next month. And we get Karen, our development director. We've been able to hire our first development director. And as a small startup nonprofit, you can all imagine how transformative it is to finally have a team. So I just want to thank you both for the match last year. Thank you for the opportunity to share what we've learned over the last few years. And thank you for telling donors that their funds are needed now more than ever. And with that, I'll thank you very much for the invitation. And I can't wait to hear what Regina has to say, because obviously St. Jude is one of the organizations we admire most.
Thanks so much, Rob. That's an
awesome.
awesome story. Really, thanks for sharing that. And Regina, we'll turn it to you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having us. Like Rob, it was wonderful to hear about your work. And I want to start first by thanking everybody on this call, the panelists and the attendees, but also congratulating everybody on the great work that's being done by all of the organizations represented, panelists and attendees. So we're really happy to be able to be a part of this conversation today. Donor advised funds are something that we really are very proud of working with at St. Jude. David really hit on it. I know a lot of nonprofits maybe are sort of stumped by donor advised funds, and Rob sort of described it in his early experience with them, and they feel a little bit mysterious sometimes. But the truth is, as David and Jen said, there's a donor behind this fund, right? And so it's really an extension of how you work with donors to your organization today, and really recognizing that there's a great amount of potential and opportunity for donors who hold donor advised fund accounts to really impact your mission. And once you're able to recognize that and identify those folks, then it's your job really to help educate them on what they can do and what they can enable at your organization, just like Rob said about some of the great work that's really started and funded by those donor advised fund holders that maybe wasn't in his budget before to be able to accomplish. So really our experience has been, we're very aligned with our donor advised fund donors. We have a lot of ways that we really try to activate those individuals. And really we focus on sort of a three-prong approach. Educating these donor advised fund grantors and donors on the impact that they're making in our mission, asking them and really soliciting them appropriately for new opportunities that make sense and that match their motivation for philanthropic giving, and really thanking and stewarding them and cultivating that relationship for the long term, because these donors, as David said, oftentimes they give in multiple ways. Even now, with donor advised funds becoming much more democratized, if you will, with the lower minimums, and in some cases, no minimums anymore, donors often give in multiple ways. And we know that particularly with significant and impactful gifts, relational cultivation and deep engagement with your mission between the donor and your organization really helps that connection grow over time. And oftentimes it can start with these donor advised fund gifts. And as Jen said, really, she talked about maybe changing that slide and bringing the amount down a little bit. Oftentimes you're getting sort of test gifts early from donor advised fund donors. And so it is good to pay attention to some of those initial gifts, those small amounts, oftentimes there is the opportunity for a really impactful long-term relationship with those individual donors. Really, because that money is available and people have such philanthropic intent behind that funding, being able to communicate with donors and promote this as an opportunity and as a way that they can impact your mission can be really impactful for your organization. And they have, donor advised funds really do across the spectrum have a good track record of stepping up for nonprofits during difficult times. And that's certainly been the case for St. Jude over the past year as well. It's been a really extraordinarily functional gift for donors during the past year in particular. I think we will only continue to see that particular giving vehicle grow. And so really incorporating that into our strategies for how we work with donors is going to represent the best long-term impact for a nonprofit organization. Over the last 5 years for St. Jude, we've really seen donor advised fund revenue growth considerably. A lot of this is just driven by how much growth and popularity donor advised funds have had, but also just being able to recognize the opportunity there and to meet that opportunity with our strategies. We really offer a blend of communications to donors, mostly through mail, that supplements and complements the good hard work of our frontline fundraisers that the rest of your organizations also use. I want to acknowledge for just a minute that we have a couple of our colleagues from St. Jude, both our frontline fundraisers and a couple of our team members that work on some of the promotion material on the call today, and they've really helped drive success with donor advised fund donors for our organization. I think that Rob hit on something important too, and you talked about sort of identifying the donors. In terms of challenges, really being able to identify those folks is kind of the universal challenge for nonprofits. We have had really great partnerships with the large sponsor organizations. We find that groups like Fidelity and Schwab, they're really encouraging donors to make an impact with the money that they have set aside for philanthropy. And that has helped us overcome some of the challenges with identifying donors behind the gifts. I think Fidelity will tell you that a lot of donors, the vast majority of them from their organization, do not require or do not want to be anonymous to the charity. And so that's a really good thing for nonprofits. The practical challenge is that, a donor advised fund that is named the Jones Family Fund can be very difficult for you to track back and link back to that donor in your system. And so that is probably the more practical challenge of really being able to steward that relationship, identify that donor, and activate their giving. And so we've worked on that in a number of ways in our office, but really it's a lot of the things that David and Rob have talked about in terms of really paying attention to those gifts, reaching out, making as many connections as possible. The DAF widget that's been discussed makes that a lot easier. It ties that gift transaction more closely to that individual donor, makes it easier for you to find them. So that's one way. Also find that electronic funds transfer is also helpful with that challenge for us as well. We've also leveraged Half My DAF where we can. It's been very helpful for us with our frontline fundraiser. It gives them another tool to talk to individual donors about how to really look at what the philanthropic intent is for their money and their donor advised fund, and how they might really want to shake that money loose to impact work that's important to them or work that those organizations are trying to drive. So that's been really another wonderful incentive and another way that we can really encourage donors to use donor advised funds. So we can cover a lot of different things. Jack, David, Jen, I think we were going to start there, and happy to take the conversation wherever you think is most appropriate for the rest of the call.
Thank you, Regina. While we still have you on, I wanted to bring up something because it's about gift planning and bequests, because this is something else that will complicate your team, and that is when an individual donor with a donor advised fund account passes away, that account has provided that person with successor beneficiary. It's an option. They don't all use it. They can either pass along the beneficiary privileges to somebody in their family, or they can simply say, whatever's left in my account, send it to my favorite charity. It's an interesting problem because that money was irrevocably given away. So it's not in that donor's estate plan because it's not their money anymore. But the impact of leaving you as a successor beneficiary is exactly the same thing. You would receive all that money. So you've all talked about donor stewardship, and it's really, really important for the individual in your organization who's working with the donor to understand how are they going to help you when they're no longer on earth? Have they irrevocably sent this money away, but they've designated you as as the beneficiary, or are they in a traditional will? Something that Rob said I want to go back to is the interesting thing about how to make it easy for a donor with a DAF account to find you. And Rob, I did the same thing. I went into Fidelity and I typed in ocean, and there's pages and pages. So I did something that I've done in a webinar before, and I typed in the word giraffe because giraffe is not native to North America. There are 20 organizations in the United States listed in Fidelity Charitable that raise money for giraffes. So the thing to do to help distinguish your name is to make your tax ID number very, very prominent on your website, on your donation page, on the page that has the DAF widget or the Daf Direct widget. Just make sure that donor ID number is the bulletproof way for somebody to find you in these national sponsors in order to get you the money. And then the last learning tip before we move on is Fidelity Charitable and these others will give you a complete annual report in a spreadsheet of every single donor that they have in common with you that they sent you a check for. So if 95% of them at Fidelity said, send my name and address, you'll get a spreadsheet and it will match what Fidelity is going to report as their 990 distribution to you. And it'll have every single donor's name and address and the amount of their grant. The one requirement is a nonprofit executive from your organization needs to make the request, and they will only send it back to someone at a nonprofit. So for all the people on this webinar who work for commercial companies, you're out of luck. But you can tell your client, and your client can get this cooperation from these big things. The learning that we've figured out is the amounts are correct, but the amounts they give you in this giving report is the day they sent the check. And that never, ever, ever matches up to the day you received the check, not even for EFT transfers. There's at least a 24-hour lag. But I would encourage you all to reach out and say, if you feel you haven't done a great job at connecting the dots between the donor behind the gift and the actual check, you could do much better going forward. I don't know how you can clean up going back, but it's a good thing to do when you're not in the crazy busy fundraising season. So with that, Nick, I know I've been trying to go through some examples. Okay, good. Here we go.
Yeah, let's
because I'm sure there are a lot of questions. These are just two examples of kind of how different nonprofits promoted Half My Daf last year. And you can even just go Google Half My Daf and you'll see other ways that people promoted it. How do I move this slide?
Yep, arrow, yep.
Quickly, when we started Half My Daf and we started to go to donors and said, look, commit to halving your DAF, people came back and said, well, I have a 3-year plan and I need to, keep this plan. Like, no, the plan is out the door. I mean, the rainy day's here and we need to start giving now. So we actually got people to say, oh, you're right. I'm going to give more now, which was really positive. And then we also heard so many positive things from the donor side of Half My Daf, people saying, I'm sitting around the dinner table. My adult kids are home because we're all sheltering in place and we're talking about money and our values and where we want to give. in ways that we've never talked before. So that was really positive. And people saying, oh, I'm inspiring. I'm talking to my parents about their donor advised fund and getting them to move the money. And so many people told us, this is the nudge I needed. So think about that when you go to your donor. I mean, the people that we talked to felt really happy about we all want to do what's right. We all want to have an impact and be our best selves. So you think of it as doing a favor to a donor who is, not quite there yet and helping nudge them to give.
Yeah. It's kind of funny and maybe not super intuitive, but even people with a lot of resources and all sorts of good intention can get kind of uncomfortable around this. And so what we found, and it really was to our surprise, it's obviously why we're such advocates for this whole concept now, is just opening that conversation, using this as an excuse to have a conversation really can, it can actually really deepen the relationship you have with your donors. Even if it doesn't lead to immediate check, gosh, there aren't a lot of people who don't appreciate some sort of outreach to say, hey, let's sort of sit down and talk about this. So here are sort of next steps for all of you guys. And Jack, you just added a couple extras. I love that idea of going to Fidelity and getting their donor report. But if you go to the website, you'll see sample donor letters. You'll see all the instructions. Reach out to your donors and DAF holders. Do some of that research. Try retroactively to figure out some people who have DAFs because you can see where their checks came from. Put that check mark, in your Salesforce database or whatever tool you use to try to track that going forward. This year, we're going to do 2 giveaways. Roughly half that $3.1 million goes out the door on May 15th. The other half goes out on September 30th. So you got some urgency kind of built into your message there. And remember, again, behind every DAF is a person, and build those relationships to how they can get involved. Jack, we'll hold this one, I guess, for a couple minutes. But I think we'll do some Q&A now, or what?
Yes, Q&A best, because we've got some pent up questions.
Pent up demand, yes.
Yeah. So do you have any insights into the language from Fidelity Charitable, but also a number of these DAF providers noting that DAF grants are recommendations, not restrictions, even if the donor puts it in with a designation?
Yeah, I mean, this is the DAF world's a little bit of a weird world, right? Because officially the money is not in your estate anymore, right? You don't control it. And so the sort of mechanics around it are you are making a recommendation to the DAF sponsor to, put that money to use. I will tell you as a practical matter, we have never, ever seen the DAF sponsor, say no. Now, community foundations sometimes do have certain restrictions, right? There's a certain ceiling you can give per year, or maybe some of it has to go to a local organization. But the truth is, for the most part, DAFs really are kind of pass-through checking accounts. The biggest problem that people have is not, no one gets turned down. The biggest problem is sometimes it's the problem you guys were talking about before. We couldn't quite figure out what the right nonprofit was, which one was intended, the money was intended to go to. So getting that tax identification number right and double checking to make sure the money's going the right place is important.
Excellent. Thank you for that. For the fundraising practitioners, how, as well as the Rishers, how would you recommend starting a relationship with Fidelity or one of the other big sponsors? Do you have a point person? How do you get your foot in the door?
What, to open an account with a national sponsor?
I'm thinking this is from the nonprofit side to see how they build a relationship with the people who are the sponsors of DAFs.
Regina, did you want to take that?
Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to add a little bit. I mean, so on the call with us today is Josh Bailey, who works with us at St. Jude. He's been a key part of our relationship with Fidelity, for example. I think I'll give you a little bit of advice, and then you kind of have to figure out how it works best in your organization. I think one thing is making yourself available and accessible to the sponsor organizations. Oftentimes as a nonprofit, we probably don't have somebody identified for this responsibility. So I think just saying, contacting the sponsor organizations, start with the ones where you're getting the biggest distribution of grants. That makes sense. Prioritize them in that way. Identify somebody, reach out, and you basically relationally cultivate the sponsor organization like you would a donor group. You reach out to them, you make yourself available, you're their representative, you talk to them, you try to figure out what you can do to make their interaction with your organization easier. What do they need? Are you doing something that can you change something that would be helpful for them? Some persistence in that relationship that fundraisers generally are very well equipped to have will benefit you a lot on the sponsor organization partnership space. Those are the things I would start with.
It's great advice. I mean, realistically, look, Fidelity's, a big organization. The chance of a meaningful connection there might not be super good. But on the other hand, for a community foundation, if every there, I don't actually remember the number of community foundations there are, but it's big. Look up your local.
800.
Yep.
Well, and you can also find an individual at Fidelity that you can build a relationship with. It is possible.
To Regina's point, exactly right. They're institutions, but they're also made up of people. Yeah. You might just kind of get sort of lucky.
That's right. But David makes a very good point about the community foundations. And that's why I suggest that you start with, where are you getting the greatest number of grants? Because you have common interest with that particular organization. When you can say, we share this many donors, we're a destination for X number of grants from your organization in the past year. I mean, those are great places to start those relationships. It may not be Fidelity for your organization. It may be the local community foundation that you want to start with. But Jen is right as well. Just making yourself available and accessible to these organizations. There are people there who will be interested in working with somebody to make this transition and transfer of funds easier for both parties.
Great, thank you. We had a question if anyone had used DAF widget instead of Daf Direct. I personally had not, so I thought I'd put it to their practitioners.
We've used both. They both work fine.
Okay.
They get the donor to the donor's account, and that's what we all want. Once we get them there, we can get the money out of the account.
Well, to David's point earlier, I think we may get into legal trouble if we call it one-click processing, but you do want to lower that friction as much as possible. So Jack, you wanted to ask a question here for the group?
I do. For those people with us, we have a poll. I'm going to give $20,000 away to charities this week because $20,000 distribution from my Schwab account will qualify these grants for the Half My DAF because the balance is under 40,000. So my question to the group is, if you were to give out $20,000, all of which is going to be able to qualify these organizations, these recipients, for a potential match from Half My DAF, would you give grants to 20 nonprofits, to 10 nonprofits, to 8 nonprofits, or to 4 nonprofits? So please check off your box. We'll wait 10 seconds. Nick will be able to answer this. Are we getting answers, Nick?
We're getting answers. We are up to 2/3 have voted with 70%. The virtual thermometer is increasing. And
okay, while we're waiting for that to click, let's go to the next slide, David. This is what I asked a group of 100 people yesterday. And I said, how would you distribute the funds? And I thought, and this is why you take surveys, I thought it would be half A and half D. And what it turns out to be is I got the half D right. People preferred that the money I give out have the greatest impact. So they were saying, give out 4 grants of 5,000. But I didn't realize that the 4 grants of 5,000 and all the others it would be an equal 50-50 split of the two. Now, after, I don't want to go to the next slide yet to see what today's group is, but David and Jen, this might be an opportunity for you to ask an equivalent question because you have the purest population possible. Anybody who sends you information that they made a gift to qualify their favorite charity is automatically a person with a DAF. Sorry. So a lot of the people who answered this thing yesterday, they don't have a giving account. They were just saying off the top of their head what they would do. I would love to know what real DAF donors answer. Okay, what did today's poll come out to?
Okay, hopefully that is now sharing.
Wow, just about the same. Half want me to go big. Now, one of the anecdotal things is most 75% of all the grants from a national sponsor go to charities that the donor has already given to. So I'm sure there's 3 clients of mine out there angling to send me text messages.
Totally.
But I also, but to Rob and Regina, I also want to thank you for your time today. So I will be making grants to your organizations as well.
Oh, that's super cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much for your time. And I hope our participants enjoyed the hour that they shared with us. And I want to thank the participants for, validating what I learned yesterday, because again, this wasn't what I expected. But I will make those grants and send those letters into half my DAF and keep my fingers crossed in May and September and see if somebody qualifies and gets picked for a match.
Great.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, everybody. This has been recorded. This will be shared as people want to do some follow-up. If you guys on the panel want to share it with anybody, feel free to do so as well. If we ran out of time and we have other questions, Nick, let's make sure that we answer those for everybody.
Yes, and feel free to send those. I can be your clearinghouse for that. I'm at nellinger@more, MOOREDM group.com. So feel free to email me and I'll get them to the right panelist.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Stay in touch, you guys.
David, Jen, good luck this year. I hope you hit a crazy big number.
We do too.
So do we. So do we. So, thanks to everyone for all the work you guys do.
Rob and Regina, thank you.
All the best,
so
guys. Thanks for spending time with us. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.